Hi everyone, today we're going to learn about Scratch, a fun and easy to use programming environment. First, let's look at our learning goals. We'll be looking to understand what Scratch is and its purpose. Recognize Scratch as a user-friendly programming environment for beginners. Create a simple animation using Scratch. So what is Scratch? Well, Scratch is designed to help beginners create games, animations, and simulations. It's user-friendly, which means it's perfect for those who are just starting out with programming. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to create a simple animation of a character or sprite moving across the screen. Scratch is a visual programming language where you can drag and drop blocks to create your code, making it very intuitive. For example, you can create a project where a cat sprite moves across the screen when you press the arrow keys. Let's get started. Next, let's talk about algorithms. Now, an algorithm is a step-by-step set of instructions to solve a problem or perform a task. Think of it like a recipe for making Rice Krispies treats or directions to a friend's house. Algorithms are important because they help us break down complex tasks into smaller, manageable steps, ensuring that tasks are completed correctly and efficiently. For example, when you follow a recipe, you need to do things in a specific order to get the desired result. Similarly, in programming, we use algorithms to make sure our code works as intended. Another example is giving directions. Turn left at the traffic light, go straight for 2 blocks, then turn right. To understand algorithms better, let's look at an example, such as brushing your teeth. Here are some familiar steps. Step 1, get your toothbrush and toothpaste. Put a small amount of toothpaste on the toothbrush. Wet the toothbrush with water. Brush your teeth for 2 minutes. Rinse your mouth with water. Rinse the toothbrush and put it away. This example shows how algorithms can be used in everyday life to complete tasks. They can be completed efficiently and correctly. Another example could be making a sandwich, such as taking 2 slices of bread, spreading peanut butter on one slice, spreading jelly on the other, then putting the slices together. Now let's learn about sprites. A sprite is an animated character or object in a game. There are several ways to create a sprite in Scratch. You can use the sprite library, which has a collection of pre-made sprites you can choose from. You can create one using the sprite editor, where you can draw your own sprite. You can import a sprite from a file, which allows you to use images from your computer. For example, you can create a sprite of a dog using the sprite editor. Sprites are essential for making your games and animations come to life. You can customize your sprites by changing their costumes, adding sounds, and programming their behaviors. Another example is using a pre-made sprite from the library, like a basketball, and programming it to bounce around the screen. To make our sprite move, we need to write some code. In Scratch, you can use the when arrow key pressed block to detect any key presses, and the move 10 steps block to move the sprite. By combining these blocks, you can make the sprite move in different directions. For example, You can use the when up arrow key pressed block to move the sprite up and the when down arrow key pressed block to move it down. This way, you can control the sprite's movement using the arrow keys on your keyboard. Let's try it out and see how our sprite moves. Another example is using the when space key pressed block to make the sprite jump. To add some fun to our sprite's movement, let's make it bounce off the edges of the screen. We can use the if on edge bounce block to achieve this effect. When the sprite hits the edge of the screen, it will bounce back, creating a bouncing ball effect. This makes our animation more dynamic and interesting. You can combine this block with the movement blocks to create a sprite that moves around the screen and bounces off the edges. For example, you can create a game where a ball sprite bounces around the screen and the player has to catch it with a paddle. These are all very good examples for you to try out once you have finished watching the video. Scratch also allows you to load and modify existing projects. You can open a pre-made game from the Scratch website and change the sprites or add new features. This is a great way for you to learn from others and get inspiration for your own projects. For example, you can open a game where a cat catches falling apples and modify it by changing the cat sprite to a dog or adding new obstacles. Another example is finding a maze game and adding new levels or changing the maze layout to make it more challenging. Let's talk about variables. Variables store information that can change. In a recipe, variables could be the ingredients, like 60 grams of butter or 90 grams of Rice Krispies. In a game, variables could be the score or the number of lives. Understanding variables is crucial for creating dynamic and interactive projects. For example, you can create a variable to keep track of the player's score and increase it every time the player collects a coin. Another example is using a variable to track the player's health in a game, decreasing it when the player gets hit by an enemy. This makes your game more engaging and fun to play. The order of instructions is very, very important. Just like a recipe, steps must be followed in the correct sequence. For example, you need to melt chocolate before adding butter and stirring. In a game, actions must happen in the right order, like moving the sprite and then checking for collisions. If we don't follow the correct sequence, things won't work as expected. For instance, if you check for collisions before moving the sprite, the game might not detect the collisions correctly. Another example is a cooking recipe. If you bake a cake before mixing the ingredients, it won't turn out right. Sequencing ensures that your code runs smoothly and as intended. In Scratch, we write code using blocks. For example, you can use the when space key pressed block to start an action and the say hello block to make the sprite speak. By combining these blocks, you can make the sprite say hello when the space key is pressed. This is how we create interactions in your projects. You can also use other blocks to add more actions, like changing the sprite's costume, playing a sound, or moving to a different position. Another example is using the when green flag clicked block to start the game and the forever block to keep the game running continuously. Again, once you have finished watching the video, you should have a go at experimenting with different blocks to see what you can create. To make our projects more interesting, we can add multiple sprites. You can add an enemy sprite to a game and write code to make it move and interact with the main sprite. This adds complexity and excitement to your projects. You can use sprites from the sprite library, create your own, or import images. For example, you can add a bat sprite that flies around the screen and chases the main sprite. You can also program the bat to change direction when it hits the edge of the screen, or when it collides with the main sprite. Another example is adding a coin sprite when the player can collect to increase their score. We can also learn from existing games. By playing popular games on the Scratch website, you can identify key features and mechanics. You can modify these games to create your own version. This process of reverse engineering helps you understand how games are made and gives you ideas for your own projects. For example, you can play a game where a character jumps over obstacles and try to recreate it with your own sprites and levels. Another example is playing a racing game and adding new tracks or changing the speed of cars. This is a great way to practice your coding skills and come up with new and creative ideas. Now it's time to design your own Scratch project. Start by brainstorming and planning your ideas. For example, you could create a simple maze game where a sprite navigates through a maze to reach the end. Think about the different elements you'll need, like the maze layout, the sprite, and the code to make the sprite move. Planning is a really important step in creating a successful project. You can sketch your ideas on paper, decide on the game's objective, and list the features you want to include. Another example is designing a platformer game where the sprite jumps over obstacles to reach the goal. This will help you stay organized and focused as you work on your project. That's all for today's lesson. But take on the advice and the learning from today's lesson and give everything I have suggested a go. And hopefully, you will end up with a very, very good and engaging, fun game. Bye for now.